the seniors, because even interns, if you look at your ID, it says clinical assistant instructor, doesn't it? Is that terrifying? You are an instructor now. You are teaching. There's going to be a lot of learners in the environment, whether it's medical students, whether you're a senior teaching your juniors, whether you're a second year teaching your interns, and there's a lot of opportunities to teach. The point of this talk is really kind of techniques and approach to some teaching in our busy ED environment, and I welcome questions and comments. All right. So this is a lecture that I originally gave a couple times with Leah Bright, who's one of our former grads from this program. Interesting point about the clinical assistant instructor. When she started her ID, you know, it says like it shortens it, but it shortened assistant with just the first 3 letters. Just think about what that says. Clinical. Anyway, good story about that, right? All right. So what I'm going to talk about, this is the outline I got to give. Some of the challenges of teaching in our environment, which you guys got to know, but I'm going to go over it a little bit. A little bit of the literature. There's really a paucity of literature, but we'll do a little bit. And then I'm going to go through some techniques, and we will conclude. And hopefully by the end you have some idea. If you guys didn't know this, this is where you work. This is Kings County. Obviously you work at Downstate also. But I don't know if you know this, but in 2018, Kings County was the 10th busiest emergency department in the country, which is pretty impressive. In 2017, we were number 7. So it kind of fluctuates. The 2019 numbers are not out yet, as far as I know. I keep checking. All right. Does it feel like this sometimes? How often are you sitting there and there's just angry patients standing on the other side of the desk and you're just trying to do a note, present the patient, and you're just kind of getting bombarded with people, right? And if you go off and work in some place, you might get a report card every single month with all your metrics. And you have the number of patients you've seen, your RVUs you generated. How are you going to sit there and teach when you're thinking about how you're going to make money, or when you sit in your chair or chief's office and they're like, well, you're not seeing enough patients, and you're like, but I'm teaching, and they're like, well, that's not what the numbers show, right? And so there is plenty of time to teach, right? And it's important that we do it, but it is not easy. We're constantly putting out fires in the emergency department, right? I mean, you have that patient over there, and that patient over there, and that patient over there. You don't have time for some medical student standing there like, like waiting to learn. You're like, I gotta save lives. All right, and are you ready for this? These are my boys. I don't know if my son was ready to carry my other son on his back, And maybe did he go through the thought process like, am I really ready for this? I don't think there's a lot of thought process in this. They're geniuses. All right, let's go through the literature a little bit. I'm not sure you know this, but overcrowding is a problem. This came out almost 20 years ago. And what's interesting is obviously it said that overcrowding is a problem in the emergency department. But what's interesting is that what they found in this study was that one of the first things to go in overcrowding, obviously a lot of things, patient care suffers, but one of the first things to go is education in the emergency department due to overcrowding. So if you didn't know this, you now have a study to prove that that's a problem. And this is interesting. This is from the internal medicine literature, specifically on bedside teaching. So going to the bedside and talking about the patient, teaching at the bedside. And this is a decent study. And what they found was, first of all, bedside teaching is decreasing. What they also found was that people who had bedside teaching did better in terms of their clinical diagnoses and interpretations after they had bedside teaching. So learners were actually better doctors after the bedside teaching. And what you might also care about, especially our medical students, is that test scores increased with bedside teaching. So people did better on their exams when there was bedside teaching, as opposed to just sitting there and reading a book, right? Because you can relate it to your patient in front of you. There's a lot of learning that can happen at the bedside. This was from the ED literature. What they did was they went to a place and they said, who are your best teachers? They asked the residents, they asked the faculty, who are the best teachers in your department? And they picked 4 faculty, and they just followed them around, and they saw what techniques they used. And I'm not going to go through every single thing in the study, but what's interesting is that if you look at some of the most common techniques, it always like involved engaging the learners. So the top four, I didn't have them memorized. So it's like number one was like 47% of them use questioning. So just asking the learners questions. Or following up is kind of a big one. Or giving advice, right? Just saying, oh, hey, this is what I would do. Right? And these are kind of various techniques that you'll see a lot of the faculty that you kind of look up to, they kind of use those techniques inherently. This is just a study kind of that I've used to get some of the ideas for this and in my own teaching. There's a bunch of papers that have come out in the ED literature on education, various techniques to use. All right. So now that we see that it's a problem and it's hard, and how do we do it? So how are you going to teach in our busy environment? So first of all, you have to know your environment, right? A cardiac arrest is not the time to start pimping. I have seen an attending pimp a medical student doing compressions with my own eyes. I have seen that happen. I've seen a medical student, an attending walks in, so what do you think the attending medical student's like, what? Like, that's their look, right? And that is not the right time. There are times to teach and there are times not to teach, and you have to know where you are in your environment, right? And you have to know how to teach. You have to look around, you have to see who's around, you have to see what's going on, and that's really important. You have to know your learner, right? You're gonna talk very differently to a first-year medical student than you would if you're an attending to a fellow, right? There's different things to teach. There's different approaches that you're going to use. And so you can't just do the same thing for every single learner. Prepare your learner. Like sometimes it's simple enough as to just say, I'm going to teach you now. Because what are you guys thinking about? When you're talking to the attending and you're presenting and then the attending starts spewing things at you, you're like, oh, okay, the lab's back on that patient in 3. I'm still waiting on the EKG. How come I can't get urine on that patient? Where's the rectal temperature on that one? And you're like, your brain is all over the place. So when just simply saying, hey, I'm going to teach you something, you're like, oh, wait, I better open up my brain. I better get ready. I better prepare for this amazing information that Dr. Schechter is going to give me. Right? It makes a difference, right? And so it's just preparing and saying, oh, hey, let's learn something now. Let's talk about something now. And it kind of focuses the brain, because we got ADD. My wife tells me all the time that it's a good thing I'm in emergency medicine. Wait, what were we talking about? Wait, okay. All right. So let's go to techniques. Are you guys familiar with spit? Have you heard of this? So spit is, this is a very common technique where this is kind of a way to kind of teach your learner how to kind of evolve their differential diagnosis. So spit, as you can see, stands for the most serious, probable, interesting, and treatable. So you should use this kind of throughout the presentation, and what's interesting is that a great learning technique is to allow the learner, whether it's a medical student or a resident, to kind of evolve their spit. It's basically diagnosis. So you have somebody come to the chest pain, and what's the most serious? You're talking about MI, dissection, PE, right? What's the most probable? Musculoskeletal pain, GERD. What's most interesting? Bore hops, right? So that's kind of crazy. And what's treatable? What are you going to do for all these? What can you do for each one of these things? Can you give some aspirin? Can you give some GI meds? Can you just give some analgesics? And what's interesting is that maybe they'll start the presentation with this, and then as the labs come in, or as the EKG comes in, and as you get more information, you do more of an exam, you can say, all right, let's spit it out again, right? So how has this differential evolved over time? Right? And you can say, well, it's not an MI because the troponins are negative, the EKG's okay, it's not a PE because we got the CTA, we got the D-dimer, we've done everything, the VQ scan, it's all good, right? So this is something that you can use constantly. It's not just a one-time thing, it evolves over the course of the presentation. Use rounds, right? And I don't know if you noticed, I'm kind of making a push to try to do some teaching on rounds. This doesn't mean a 30-minute lecture at every single patient. It's pick a couple patients on rounds and say, all right, let's learn something. Let's talk about something for a minute. Even if it's, sometimes I'll just be like, hey, let's think about this for the future. Or let's get a teaching point here. Rounds is a really great learning opportunity. You have a patient in front of you, there's something going on with them, and the learner's brains will kind of be able to focus it onto something that they can touch, something tangible, a patient, an actual story. So use rounds as an opportunity, everybody's together, to kind of learn and focus on. Are you guys familiar with the 1-minute preceptorship? Have you guys heard of this? So this is a technique that you can use. I kind of use like kind of a variation of this when you guys talk to me. But I'm going to let actually some surgery people do it. And that might sound good. I hope this works. I forgot to gear this up. How do I get this on the screen? Where's the volume?
How patients be so complicated?
When I do a clinic, it only takes my student about a minute to present a case.
What? How does that work?
I just use 1 minute preceptor.
1 minute what?
It's one of my teaching tricks. It's easy, it's fast, and it makes me look so smooth.
You gotta give it to me, dude. I'm dying here.
Okay, but you're buying lunch, right?
Okay, but this better be good, and I'm not supersizing you.
Dealio.
Okay, hit me. Seriously, I have to get back to the clinic tooth sweet.
Right, so, you know the way normally the student comes out and they try to present the case to you like,
Yada yada yada, presenting complaint, blah blah blah, medical and surgical history, medications, allergies, whatever. Oh yeah, I'm very familiar with all that.
good, because the first thing you gotta do is skip over all that crap.
Really?
Yeah, just kick it to the curb. Students are supposed to learn that before they get here. So just skip over that and get to the good stuff.
Are we allowed to do that?
For sure, we're not forgetting about all that stuff. We're just saving some time. That's what the 1 minute preceptor is all about.
Okay. So what do you do instead?
Don't worry, man. We got steps. Step 1 is get a commitment.
Whoa. Boundaries. I'm pretty sure we're not allowed to do that with students anymore.
Oh, no, not that sort of commitment. You just need to commit to a diagnosis.
You just like ask them straight up? Like, okay, so what's the diagnosis?
Well, I usually say it like, what do you think is going on? Or what do you think we should do?
But what if they're wrong?
Doesn't really matter. You just gotta get them to make a decision.
Okay, I think I can do that. What's next? Clock's ticking, dude.
Okay, step 2 is probe for supporting evidence.
Ha! Probing the students, eh? Ha
You really have some issues, don't you?
Yes.
Well, look, you're just asking them to explain their reasoning here. Like, okay, you think the diagnosis is whatever. Tell me why. If they got the right diagnosis, you want to make sure they got there the right way. And if they're on the wrong track, you need to know where they went wrong. This is the longest step. It can take like 30 seconds maybe.
That's like half a minute, bro. We better speed it up.
Just focus on the important stuff here, positive findings and relevant negatives. It's pretty quick. At this point, you might go and see the patient together briefly and confirm what your student has found, and make a plan.
Okay, what's next?
We're almost done, and the next 2 steps are linked. Step 3 is reinforce what was done well. Pick 1 or 2 things the student did right and let them know they did well.
I love getting positive feedback. It gives me all those warm
Okay,
fuzzies.
but keep it brief, because step 4 is give guidance about errors and omissions.
Can we just skip that step? I really need my students to like me, dude.
Nope, you gotta help them learn, which means telling them when they screw up.
But what if there's like 6 things they screwed up?
Just pick 1 thing, tell them, and move on. Remember, you only have a minute.
Okay, I think I can do that. Just breathe. Is our minute almost up?
Almost. Step 5 is teach a general principle. For each case you see with a student, give them 1 pearl. You know, like a general point that applies to most cases.
Cool, a teachable moment like, don't mess with the pancreas.
Something like that, or like, always check for hernias on the abdominal exam. Make sure to check the lipase for every acute abdomen.
Okay, I can do that.
That's it, we're done. Next patient, please.
Really? That was never a minute. That was so fast.
It is fast, but remember, you should do this every time a student sees a patient for you, and get them to make notes. At the end of the clinic, you can sit down and review all the stuff they learned today. They should have at least 1 thing for each patient they saw. They learned lots of stuff, and you look great. It's a win-win.
And I'm all about looking good.
Yeah, yes you are. Now, before you go back to clinic, can you remember the steps?
Okay, let's see. 1, get a commitment.
Put a ring on it.
2, probe for evidence.
No actual probing.
3, reinforce the good stuff.
Not too much.
4, guidance on stuff that could be better.
Just one thing.
And 5, teach a general rule. And then move on to the next section. Clinic's going to be so lit.
All right. So that was a fairly decent review of the 1-minute precept by a bunch of surgeons. And I think that's kind of, I don't want to go over the whole thing again. I think that was a pretty decent review. And the 1-minute preceptorship, that's really what it is. It's 1 minute. And a lot of times you'll hear me say to you, what do you think, what do you want to do, right? And then I'm going to push you to say what you really want to do. And I'm going to try to use that time to kind of teach something and maybe go over things that kind of would be different. That's just one technique. There's a bunch of different techniques out there. There's things like SNAPs, which is a little bit more learner-driven as opposed to teacher-driven. And then there's things that are ED-specific that are a little bit more involved. I don't really want to spend the whole time discussing various ways of taking a presentation in the clinical area. And you know, you have to, there is a balance, right? Sometimes this is something that happens, right? I definitely will do this. Like, oh, you do whatever you want. And you're like, okay. And then I'll be like, no, not that. Anything like that. Right? And that's important, right? And that's what, this is literally how you can use the 1-minute preceptorship, right? You're like, okay, what do you think? You have to make a decision. And it's hard to make your learner choose to do something. It's hard to say, you know, well, you got to do, it's so easy to just say, okay, do this, this, and this, do these labs, do this, and then we'll talk about it afterwards. But that doesn't happen, right? So by forcing the learner to do something, right, to actually make a decision, they get a lot of learning in that, even if it's the wrong decision, and that's okay too. All right, bring it to the bedside. I kind of discussed some of the advantages of the bedside teaching. There's a lot, and I know what some of you guys feel a little uncomfortable. You know, I gave this talk someplace, and the residents were like really hesitant. They're like, but it kind of undermines our authority as their doctor. It doesn't, right? It actually makes the patients feel more comfortable. They've done studies on this, and patients feel more comfortable because not only do they feel like somebody actually cares about them and their problems, but it also gives them an opportunity to be involved in their own care. Because what happens is sometimes the learner will present to the teacher at the bedside, and then the patient will pop in and be like, oh, actually it's this, or actually I remember this. And you can actually provide better care and involve your patient in their care. So they think that people are actually talking about them and thinking about them and discussing them, as opposed to being like, oh, that person's the resident. I don't want the resident taking care of me. I want that guy, the handsome bearded guy. That's right, Dr. Hassel, right? That's who I want taken care of, right? So that's the important stuff, right? You bring it to the bedside. It's okay. There's a lot of learning you can do. There's great physical exam teaching you can do at the bedside. You know, rashes. You know, how often do you sit there and you're like, well, the rash, it's red and it's raised but it's flat and you know, and it's warm but it's cold at the same time. You know, a lot of times I'll say, all right, let's just go. I'll just stand up and walk over to the bedside. It's not very far away, and you can actually do a lot of physical exam teaching, discuss the patient at the bedside, and you can get some great learning in that way. And kind of that paper really showed a lot of the advances, even if it's from the internal medicine literature. I think the emergency department is a great opportunity to do bedside teaching. So the internet is an amazing thing, and it's a great opportunity to kind of teach your learner how to figure out things on the fly, right? Because I don't know all the answers myself. I'm sitting there looking stuff up all the time. You know, you guys love the Wiki EM, or whether it's up to date, whatever your feelings are about up to date. There's a lot of resources available to us in the minute to minute, and it's okay to not know something. And sometimes I'll be like, well, I don't know, let's go look it up together. And not only are you learning together with your learner, but you're also teaching the learner how to figure out things when you don't know the answer. Because that's what's going to happen. You guys are going to go out into the world, your learner's going to go out into the world, and they're not always going to know the answer. And if you think you always know the answer, that's a big problem. And it's realizing that you don't always know the answer. You're teaching, first of all, humility. You're teaching them how to figure out things in the real time. And you're teaching the best way to figure out answers in real time. And that's kind of important. The delayed teaching is a great technique. I don't do it enough. Dr. D'Souza is very good at this. I think anybody who's done a shift or two with Dr. D'Souza has gotten an email from him afterwards with a paper or a teaching point. And this is a great way. You don't have time to sit there and talk about it. You don't have time to sit there and be like, oh yeah, there's a paper on this, let's go through it. You can actually, send out the paper or be like, oh hey, we had that rough case today, let's go through some, and you just kind of email out, like, this is kind of the things that I think you can learn from that case. These are the things that you did well, these are the things that went wrong. You don't have time necessarily after that recess to discuss every aspect of it, especially if the shift is really crazy. So delayed teaching is a great way to teach outside of the clinical environment, but still bring it back to the realities of what you experienced together. New studies. How many guys? How many people have heard of this study? Right. This is like the New England Journal study. They basically found that like a huge chunk of patients with syncope have PEs. And then I actually remember when this came out because that resident doctor was like, "Oh, do we have to now get a CTA on every single patient with syncope?" And obviously that's ridiculous. This is a terrible, terrible study, and nobody should ever make any decisions on this. But it's in the New England Journal of Medicine. It must be a good study. So this is a great opportunity when somebody, kind of brings up a study. Like that happens all the time. People are like, oh, well, I saw a study on this. Well, just because it's a study, you can use this opportunity to do a little bit of EBM teaching. Be like, well, hey, what did that study show? Well, how good was that study? You go through, you don't have to sit there and do a whole journal club in the middle of your shift, but you can just kind of use this time to kind of do some teaching. And you can be like, or maybe you can be like, well, let's go see if there's any other studies on this real quick, because we have the computer sitting right in front of us. This is on the slower shifts. This is maybe when you're sitting in CCT between resuscitation. And you can be like, well, there's a study from the Journal of American College of Cardiology that pretty much shows that that's crap. Or from our own ED literature from Annals showing that that's pretty much crap. Right? And let's go through why these studies are maybe a little more reliable than that one that's published just because it's in the New England Journal of Medicine. And that's a great teaching moment. The debrief, super important, right? Anything goes bad, after every resuscitation, anything goes bad. This is an opportunity. You can sit down. You should probably sit down with the team. I try to do after cardiac arrest, after major resuscitations, to debrief with the whole team. Bring the nurses in. It's really important. They're part of our team. Right? It helps you bond with the nurses, but also helps us maybe do better resuscitations the next time. So just discussing like, okay, what went well during that? What went poorly? What could we have done better? How can we make it better next time? And simple, just spend 5 minutes discussing maybe something really bad happened. Maybe we gave the wrong medication, or maybe a patient fell out of the bed. And sometimes a simple, let's go over what happened, or maybe you just made a really bad decision. Or the learner made a really bad decision. The debrief is a great opportunity to discuss that in real time afterwards, not during. You're not going to debrief during your cardiac arrest or during this, but not long afterwards you can sit there and do the debrief. It's a great learning opportunity. All right, so now I'm going to go through a shift, just kind of a sample shift. So you wake up, it's your 7 to 3, and at rounds, you do some teaching, right? So you get the rounds. You maybe pick 2 patients to make some teaching points on. Rounds are over, and then you ask the resident or the learner or the medical student to say, oh hey, can you identify something you want to learn for the rest of the shift? Just 2 teaching points can go a long way. They might give you a look like my daughter here. And then throughout the shift, you'll use various techniques. You might do spit at the bedside. You might do OMP, which can sometimes feel like you're getting beat up. They love each other a lot. See how it starts with loving? That's what an OMP is like. It's like, I love you, you're great, what do you want to do? You're doing awesome, right? That's totally wrong. You can't do that, you're going to kill the patient, right? And that's kind of what OMP can feel like sometimes. But it's really, there's a lot to learn, I think both of them learned a lot from that experience. All right. And then at about 2:30, maybe you'll identify some patients that you can talk about during rounds, maybe somebody that you saw, or you kind of look through the board and be like, okay, that patient has like hypercalcemia. Maybe I'll talk about hypercalcemia in rounds. That patient has, flexor tenosynovitis. Maybe we could talk about that on rounds and kind of prepare, what you want to talk about. You know, you can make, and what's great is that the more you do this, kind of this, you can have like stock kind of things to talk about on rounds. You'll see I kind of pretty much bring up every single patient with alcohol withdrawal on rounds. I'll be like, should we be admitting every single patient with alcohol withdrawal, and talk a little bit about alcohol withdrawal, right? And that's kind of something that I've done. So you like use rounds, and then you're finally done, but then maybe you'll send out an email or a text and be like, hey, that patient that you saw, you know, I think you could have done this better, or here's that article that we discussed today on shift. And those are kind of the various ways that you can kind of, that's kind of a sample way to kind of go through your shift and do some awesome teaching but still functioning in our busy environment. And I try to do some of these. You're not going to do all of this on shift. These are various tools, and there's more tools out there. This is just some of them. Anybody have any comments? Anybody have any techniques that I didn't talk about that they think might be good? From our senior faculty or faculty? Yeah, what's up? Teaching fellow.
Teaching. One thing I like to do, especially with medical students, is at the very beginning, like 5 or 7 minutes in, say, okay, glad you're here, good to be here, whatever. At the end, when we debrief, I want you to tell me 3 things that you learned.
Yeah.
So I already put things in the mindset of, okay, this is a teaching shift, we're going to learn a lot. But then also, they have to remember it. Like, if they learn something 5 minutes later, they have to remember it 8 hours later to be able to tell you about it. So also, cements in your mind what they did.
That's a really good point. Like sometimes I'll say at the end of the shift, okay, what did you learn this shift? And people will be like, how to get an EKG done, like, you know. But it's important, and sometimes you need somebody to focus you and say, what did you, and so you could be like, oh, don't you remember, we talked about this, and you're just kind of reminding them what they learned, and it kind of solidifies it a little bit better. So kind of at the end of the shift saying, okay, what did you learn? Even if it's just 2 or 3 things, right? You're learning all the time, right? And your learners are constantly learning on the shift. They're learning by watching you, what you do, watching you, how you interact with the patients, what you say to them. That all kind of comes in, right? And so when you are setting an example, but there are certain points that you can like allow them to kind of take with them and remember a little bit better. That's a really good point. Anybody else have any other techniques that they use or have seen used, have been used on them? Yeah.
I think sometimes when I don't know what to do and I think I'm gonna change, I just talk out loud. Just say
Yeah, show your thought process and be like, okay, this is what I think is, you know, and you know, a learner can learn a lot by how you get to the conclusions you get to. That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, so priming them beforehand, figuring out what they want to do. That's kind of what the idea of like saying, okay, like, what do you want to learn on this shift? And you know, some of the techniques that I talked about, like the OMP and SNAP, and there's an ED stat one that kind of a lot of it is if you're working with somebody like often, you can kind of start beforehand, meet even before the shift, and be like, okay, this is the things that you need to work on because maybe you've worked with them before, and this is what do you want to learn, and then you kind of throughout the shift you kind of focus on those things, and afterwards you can kind of round it out as well. So to conclude, just some of the techniques that we talked about. So spit, the 1-minute preceptor, teaching rounds, bringing it to the bedside. I think really bringing it to the bedside and rounds are kind of really important. And I think it's really important that you engage your learner. Just having them there with you is not enough. Engaging them is the best. When that study is, when they looked at those faculty members that were considered the best teachers, if you look at their techniques, it was always about talking and engaging with them. Asking questions, following up, giving teaching points, giving advice. So engaging the learner is the most important thing that you can do. No matter what technique that you use, they all involve bringing that person into the fold with you and helping them. All right, and plan. Right, you can say to yourself, if you say to yourself, okay, this shift I'm going to do OMP at least 3 times. I'm going to go to the bedside at least 2 times, and I'm going to teach on rounds. And that's really important. And going in there with the mindset that you want to teach is the first step to being a great teacher, no matter how busy the emergency department is. And you know, the quote, the great cocaine rattled William Osler, to study the phenomena of disease without books is to sail an uncharted sea, whilst to study books without patients is not to go to sea at all. So learning in the environment with our patients is really important for no matter whether it's a medical student or resident or whoever else. That's it.
Let's take a 10-minute break.